Hello and welcome to another video of Solidity Do-It-Yourself tutorials. In the last video, what we did was we created a transaction uh, using an array of transaction, and we also talked about the transaction map. Now, if you look at it, we have this contract, and let me add uh, a transaction here. Add transaction, this one. So I'm gonna say Jeff and $100, and I say add transaction. And while in this transaction list, I can say, give me the transaction at index 0, and it gives me the transaction. I added Jeffrey, and I'm going to say 1100 at transaction. At 0, I have Jeff, and at 1, I have Jeffrey. Now, what if I want to create a function in order to retrieve these transactions? Let's see how I do that. In order to do that, first I'll delete the contract here, and I'm going to write a function, get transaction list. This function is going to get me the list of the transaction from an index. So I'm going to replicate exactly the index thing that I showed. When you put 0, you'll get the 0th index transaction. And if I put 1, you'll get the index 1 transaction. External, that means it can be called externally. View returns. So it's a view only transaction on the blockchain. It's not going to change any state of the blockchain. And you have transaction, which is the structure we defined here, and memory. So it's going to be in the memory. So it's going to return one transaction based on that index. And I'm going to say return transaction list, which is an array of the transaction, and I'm passing this index. Make sense? And I'm going to close the bracket. One more time, function get transactions list from an index it takes as an input. It returns a transaction, a single transaction based on the index. Simple. Let's go ahead, compile, and deploy the transaction. I deployed the transaction. This is a new contract, so I'm going to add again the same thing, Jeff 100 and add transaction. You see here, get transaction list. I'm going to say give me 0, pretty much the same thing as this transaction list would do, right? So I'm going to add 0 here, the same thing. So I replicated this as in a function. Now I'm going to write another function that is going to give me all the array elements in that array. So for example, if I say Jeffrey and say 1100 here, add transactions, I don't have to provide an index. It'll give me all the transactions, right? So let me show you how to write the function to do this. Let's write it. So I'm going to say function get transaction list, the same all. You don't have to pass in any index because I'm going to get all the transactions that are available. Again, external view returns. This is the difference. The previous one returned one transaction structure. It returned a structure of one transaction. In this one, in the all, it returns an array of transactions. So transaction array, it's going to return a transaction of arrays from the memory, and that is the difference. This is the reason why I wanted to show you how to create these two functions. So I'm going to say return transactions list. I don't need an index because I need to get an array of transactions returned back. I'm going to delete the contract, go back here, compile, go back here, deploy. It's deployed, and let me do exactly the same thing. You see here, get transaction, get transactions all. So I'm going to do the same thing, Jeff 100 transaction. I say 0, it returns me 1. I say all, it returns me Jeff 100. Next, I'm going to do a Jeffrey 1100 add transaction. I'm going to say 1 Jeffrey 1100, and I say here it returns me both the transactions. These functions were interesting because we are going to call these functions going forward from a different contract. Again, thank you for watching.